Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today I have Erica Thomas with me. Erica is an expert in mother-daughter relationships and a licensed psychotherapist of over 18 years. She's the owner of Vita Nova Counseling and Vita Nova Mother-Daughter Coaching in Liberty Hill, Texas. Both practices were created to guide mothers and daughters towards a path of healing, hope, and restoration in their relationships. Erica is also a consultant, mentor, and trainer, assisting mental health professionals all around the world to navigate mother-daughter dynamics with their own clients. Hello, Erica, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I'm so looking forward to this conversation because it's near and dear to my heart, but also I had multiple people in my private Facebook group message and ask about this topic when I solicited for feedback on topics they were interested in. So hopefully we can bring to the listeners some information and some tips and tools that maybe will help them as they go forward. Before we dig in though, two things. I want to set the stage for the listeners that when we connected, we quickly made the conclusion that we sort of had to break this out into a couple of segments or chunks, right? Because the subject is wide and it can go deep as well. And we wanted to make sure we gave them the level set, but then got into some practical information about how they can change things up. So just to level set for folks, first we'll talk about the core components of dysfunctional generational patterns, and then start looking at how do we break out of them and what's some things we can do to reshape those relationships and that dynamic. So that will be our setup. But before we go there, can you share some of your history and what led you to this journey in this so important area? But there's not a lot of experts in this space. So I'd love to hear how you got here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Marianne. Yeah, it was a calling. For me, I was driving one day and I knew there was a really important element that I really needed to focus on, and that was mother-daughter relationships. One of the reasons I got into mother-daughter relationships was because of my own relationship with my mother. It's a very complicated relationship, and I saw how it affected me as a woman, how I saw myself as a woman in all aspects of my life, as a professional, as a mother, as a friend, how I connected in relationships. And my mother did the best as she could, but there were some things that I personally had to do some inner work so that I could move forward and kind of see myself in a different way. And then the second reason was because I worked with thousands of women, and when they come to me, they're feeling stuck in their lives. And inevitably, part of what comes up is their relationship with their mothers, whether it was 100% reason why they're there, or maybe even just a 5%, but their mothers are involved and how they got to where they are. So to me, this was just a calling. I felt it was a natural thing. And I feel really, really blessed that I get to do this day in and day out.
I love that. It definitely helps when you feel passion and connection to your thing, right? I mean, that's what works and really makes us shine in our own respective spaces. Thank you for sharing that. And it also helps set the stage for probably many of the listeners who will be trying to take something away from this, share lots in common with what you just said, right? They're all experiencing, or many of them experiencing, very similar things to different degrees. So let's start, like we said, by sort of setting the stage and talk about what is a dysfunctional generational pattern and mother-daughter dynamic, and what does that look like?
Marianne, that's a loaded conversation. So we're going to break it up in parts. I guess the best way to explain this is a dysfunctional relationship is based on a model that I know I was trained in and I use. It's called the mother-daughter attachment model that was developed by Rashka Hasseldine. And she's been around many, many years. And it was based on her work with mothers and daughters over 25 years. And she's noticed over that time, she noticed that there was a common trend of patterns in the mother-daughter history that led to the conflict of where they were and what led them to mother-daughter therapy or coaching in the first place. You know, when we think about conflict and us as therapists or coaches, we often are taught that we are fighting not about what we're actually fighting about. It's usually a very underlying cause. There's an undercurrent. And it's the same thing with mothers and daughters. Women need to be connected in some way. So sometimes they find that connection with their daughters. Unfortunately, when they try to connect with their daughters, they're filled with these dysfunctional patterns and the connection is hurt. What I love about using this model is that it's a non-blaming model. Oftentimes, you know, when mothers and daughters come to me, mothers are quite scared. They're afraid that they're going to be blamed and they're afraid that they're going to be told everything that they did wrong and how it led to where their daughter is now and how it led to the conflict. But really, the reason why I choose to use this model is because of those dysfunctional generational patterns that are passed down from mother to daughter. If we're not aware of these patterns that are passed down, we are doomed to repeat them. So we have to know what they are. I will just kind of briefly go into them.
Yes, please.
The first one is the culture of female service. And what that one is the idea that women are supposed to be caregivers. You know, we're taught in our family, women do this, whether it's we're directly taught that or we see that, we're taught that. We see that in our family. It's the women who take care of the grandparents. It's the women who take care of the meals and certain roles. So you do get those gender defined roles. So it's also the idea that good women are caregivers. So there's also a shame component to it. And, you know, that sometimes even leads to what we call excessive caregiving, where women don't know where to stop when it comes to caregiving. They find things to care for. So if their children leave, they adopt pets, they find a way to adopt children, or, you know, they need to feel needed. So it turns into excessive caregiving. And inevitably, they pass down, if they're not careful, that pattern to their daughters. The second one is emotional silencing and neglect. This is a pattern where it's kind of in the name, where we as women are conditioned to stay quiet for the sake of peace, the sake of maintaining peace, or we neglect our need. We put everybody else first. And the problem with that is that we do end up forgetting ourselves. We do end up becoming an invisible factor in our families, in our relationships. You know, we teach people how to treat us. We teach people that our needs are not okay in our relationships. So then the culture in the relationship goes on that way if it's not addressed. The next one is lost women. So lost women is the pattern where the woman defines herself and gets lost in her role, usually a caregiving role, and cannot see herself beyond that role. Okay. So another way this shows up is a person who, you know, a professional, where she works so hard that she can't see herself anything but beyond her profession. So it's really this engrossment into your role where you lose your identity. You don't know how to exist any other way. The next one is the river of nurturing flowing backwards. This is a theme that shows up a lot with mothers and daughters, where the mother expects for the daughters to meet their needs, whether it's intentionally or sometimes even subconsciously. And the way that looks like is the daughter is walking on eggshells around mom, making sure that mom doesn't get mad. So she has to be very careful with her words and her actions. Or sometimes the way it looks like it's, you know, with parentified children, maybe in their childhood, they were directly responsible for their mother's needs. So the river of nurturing goes backwards. Rather than going down from the mother to the daughter, it goes upward from the daughter to the mother. The next one is called guilty by proxy. This one is actually a pretty dangerous one. This one is where a woman or a daughter is either expected to take the blame for a situation so that the other person is absolved. This could be something like in victims of abuse, where even the perpetrator is not acknowledged. And, the daughter goes on and the parents and the mother never really acknowledges what happens. And the way this ends up playing out too is they end up assuming the guilt inappropriately for conflicts. Okay, fine. It was my fault. Yes. Just to keep the peace, just to avoid the conflict. But it creates resentment and disconnection and anger and sadness and all those big emotions that cause that disconnect in a mother-daughter relationship. So the next one is maternal jealousy. This one is an interesting one because this one actually involves the mother's grieving of unfulfilled dreams, of the things that she never got to fulfill in her life. She had these goals, she had these dreams, but life happened, got in the way, and they were never fulfilled. And her daughter is a reminder. A daughter who is accomplishing those dreams is a reminder of what she never accomplished. That is an interesting one, I think, for many reasons. The next one is payback mother and mother-in-law. So this one is where you have a mother who just spends a lifetime and is exhausted of caregiving, that she hits a point where then she expects her daughter to take care of her, whether it's her physical needs or, even her emotional needs. I'm done. Now it's your turn. So sometimes there is a cultural component to that. There are some cultures where, yes, you have the children who are responsible for their elderly parents, but this actually becomes dysfunctional when the mother does not take responsibility for her own needs at all.
That one's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are more obvious than others. Some of them feel like you would know if it's present, maybe not be able to name it, but other ones feel like they're nuanced just enough that you might not even be sure there's something there.
You're right. You're right. And as I describe these, you might also notice they're kind of intertwined. Some lead to others, and so they have somewhat of an overlap as well.
The other thing I was thinking is I'm guessing that they all have various levels as well. Levels is probably not the right word. Degrees, I don't know what the right word is, but I'm sure they can be minor and then they can be severe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's either, the mom just making a slight correction, a slight adjustment, and then things end up just falling into place. But yes, when it gets to the severe place, I would say that it's usually where there has been unresolved trauma, unresolved issues that are being played out in the mother-daughter relationship. So what I often encourage mothers and daughters to do is to make sure that they have done their inner work before they go into mother-daughter coaching, because not everybody is a good candidate. There's so many raw moments that come with mother-daughter coaching because it does entail vulnerability. You have to be vulnerable in this process in order to see change, in order to see progress. And if you have unresolved issues, then you're not going to go there. You've got these walls and you're going to stay up because that's what's worked for you and that's what's keeping you safe.
These are so fascinating. And I know we're not done yet, but I can't help with all the thoughts that I'm having about starting to want to lay out some of the how we move forward, how we get past some of this. What do we do if one party wants to work through it and another party doesn't or isn't ready?
I've had varying degrees of where the mother is ready, but the daughter is not, right? Daughter is ready, but mother is not. Or maybe the mother's not around, or maybe the daughter's not around, whether it's they're estranged or they passed away. So they have no way of resolving the issues with their mother or their daughter directly, or they come in together as a pair and it ends up not working. So I oftentimes propose when this happens is, continuing my work with the mother or the daughter to help them with that grief, the grief of maybe they may not ever be able to have that mother-daughter relationship that they've envisioned and that they've wanted, and learning how to move forward without it.
Yeah, I think from my experiences and people around me, that's sort of the hardest thing, I think, is getting past the what you wished it to be, what you thought it would be, what you think it should be, all those things. Yeah, and just learning to be okay with what it is.
Absolutely.
And whatever that looks like at the end, maybe it is or it isn't, but whatever reality is, learning to be okay with that.
Absolutely. And that's a hard thing to do. It's easier said than done. I personally have experienced this with my mother. Luckily, we were able to come together and connect in a way that, it has been healing, but you try again and again to reach out. And you're hopeful, you're thinking, okay, maybe this time they will respond differently. Maybe they'll take it differently this time. And then you're met with the same hurtful response. And it's extremely hurtful, especially when the mother or the daughter don't want to work with you, don't see it, or they're, just kind of stuck in their ways. And what I say is goes digging their heels into the ground, per se. It's a very hard thing, but, I do help mothers and daughters grieve that loss of vision. And sometimes it's hard too when you see movies or you see pictures in a book or a magazine, and you see the mother and daughter having a great relationship, or a daughter saying, my mother's my best friend. And oh, how we wish that.
Yeah.
But we can't have that.
Yeah.
Darn. And it's hurtful.
And I guess accepting that is probably the first step, and then determining how you can develop something close to that elsewhere, or how you can avoid creating that same relationship pattern. So for example, if the problem is with your mother, maybe you can have a different relationship with your daughter, or maybe it's a daughter-in-law. I'm sure there's other ways to find that type of relationship, right? In lieu of what you had hoped for.
Absolutely. Yes. The first step is what we call radical acceptance, right? It is what it is. This is what it's going to be. This is what I have. So how am I going to move forward with what I have? I can't have what I want. This is what I have. How can I help myself heal and grow, even though I don't have what I need really to heal, or what I think I need, right? Whether it's your mother or your daughter. Yeah. And it's not too late. If we cannot rekindle that relationship with our mothers or our daughters, if we are a mother and we have a daughter, we can still change that relationship. It is not too late. Partly it's understanding what dysfunctional patterns have been passed down from your mother-daughter history, and really making an intention to change them. And it does take a lot of intentionality to do that work, so that you don't repeat that, and you create future generations of women that in your family line that feel empowered. They don't feel prisoners to these patterns, and they can go on and live their lives in the way that you would hope that they would, and be happy for them and help them reach their God-given potentials. If you're a listener out there and you have a complicated relationship with your mother, or had one, and maybe your mother is not around. If you have a daughter, it is not too late. Even if your daughter is an adult, it is still not too late. You can still change that trajectory. Part of mother-daughter coaching is not just really fixing the relationship at hand, but it's also creating a legacy. You're also creating something that is bigger than yourself.
I guess I'm trying to figure out if most of the time there are two willing participants in the work, or do you more often see where it's one person trying to do the work to get past what wasn't or couldn't be?
So most of my work is with pairs. Over the time of my mother-daughter coaching, I've learned how to assess whether or not a mother and a daughter are ready for mother-daughter coaching. The thing is, really, the whole idea of mother-daughter coaching is you want that relationship to turn out for the better. You want to experience healing. You want to experience restoration. And it's not about creating more hurt. Now, you've got to go through the stuff. You got to talk about some hurtful stuff in order to move forward. But it's not about tearing that relationship further down than what it is, tearing you down. in the process. So I try to do the best that I can to assess whether or not a mother or, the mother-daughter pair are ready. If they're not, I encourage them to go do their inner work first before they go into mother-daughter coaching.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I want to circle back to the beginning when you were laying out all the patterns and what they meant, and remind everybody that the patterns that we see in our lives don't exclusively sit with the mother-daughter relationship. It's more widespread in that it can show up at work, it can show up with spouses, it can show up in lots of different ways. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because one of the things I want folks to be able to do is to walk away with being able to identify where these patterns might be in their lives. So I think that's important because I don't know that I would have always connected those other relationships and how they tie back.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we peel it back. The mother-daughter relationship really permeates into so many aspects of our life. And if that relationship is not right, or we're not right with that relationship, it does. It leaks into marriages. It leaks into, one of the things about your mother-daughter history that we look into also is your relationship with men. How do men treat women in your mother-daughter history? Do they treat them as equals? Do they inquire after their needs, after their thoughts, after their feelings, and seeing, how that affected if they didn't have the men in their lives inquire after their needs, promote silencing. And, one of the things I didn't mention was these patterns are based on a patriarchal norms. And oddly enough, especially modern women, they're like, I consider myself a strong, independent woman, but not knowing that these are ahistorical patterns and they are passed down. And if we're not careful, we do pass them down into our relationship. They do affect how we connect with our friends, especially female friends, how we connect with our coworkers. If you are in a leadership position, it may affect how you connect with your mentees, your supervisees. So the people, the people that work for you, it does affect the way you connect with them, especially the women. Those patterns can be passed down.
So interesting that it's not isolated to the specific mother-daughter relationship.
It is not. And the thing too is, say say one of your listeners are mothers of sons. It's interesting too, is that the mother-daughter relationship kind of permeates into what a son would want and how they should treat women. And that's a really important thing. If they see their dad silencing their mom, they think this is the thing to do, unless they really make a conscious choice to break those cycles, right? They repeat the same thing.
Well, I'm sure that the pattern there is similar to the mother-daughter in that when we're growing up, we don't know to identify these things. So they shape us, they shape our beliefs, they shape probably our personalities to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not at a time where we can say, ooh, look at that thing. I don't want to do that. Unless it's really severe. Of course, if something's really severe, abuse or whatever, you might recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these are a little bit more discreet.
They are. I think too, some people pleasing has a lot to do with your mother-daughter history. And I think us as women, we tend to fall into that pattern. And we have to do the work to say no. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, about boundaries and whatnot. But people pleasing is a reflection of the culture of female service, that we as women are supposed to be caregiving for others. We're supposed to be of service to others. And if we're not good women. We're not good girls.
There's that shame element again, right?
The shame element. Yeah. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another one is people pleasing is overcommitment. You're committing to this and that. And before you know it, you're so overwhelmed that you can't complete one task well. It becomes overwhelming. And then what happens is we don't look at necessarily the situation without blaming ourselves. There is that shame element. I'm not good enough. I'm not, superwoman enough.
I was just going to ask that, like, which one is the one that ties into overachievers? So many of us are out there always looking for that validation. until we get to a certain age and realize it. Often it's that external validation, but we're always striving because nothing's ever good enough. Once we get the thing, now it's like, okay, what's the next thing? Because, you're constantly on that hamster wheel of trying to achieve that validation that likely comes from one of these relationships, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which one does that tie into, or several?
It ties into several. It ties into, lost women. It ties into, emotional silencing and neglect. It ties to cultural female service.
They're all intertwined.
Yeah. So it's several.
Yeah.
And they're all intertwined. And we do get validated and we do get praise for how much we can do in a day. Wow. How do you do that? And, we look at these women with a lot of admiration and we look at them as inspiration. And, and not that we shouldn't. I think that we should praise them for their work and we should do that, but not at the cost of shaming ourselves. Or she accomplished these 10 tasks. I only accomplished 5.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me?
Yeah. Or I had a list of 12 and I got 10 done. How come you didn't do the other 2?
Right. Right. And never mind that maybe you had a crisis in the day and you had these 10 tasks and you only got to 2. You don't necessarily focus on the fact that you successfully maneuvered the crisis that you had no idea. And maybe a couple of them,
yeah,
you focus on the other 8 that you didn't focus on. you didn't accomplish. That's what we focus on. Yeah, it's kind of a vicious pattern that I really would love for us as women to get out of and really honor ourselves and our, not just the strengths that we were given, but also even limitations. We're not going to be good at everything. Not all of us are meant to be multitaskers. I'm definitely not one. I have to do one thing at a time. I'm bound to burn something if I do more than one thing.
Good to know yourself and your limitations, right?
Right. But honor that as, you know what, this is just me.
Yeah.
This is what I do. And how do I work within that?
Yeah.
Right. Within that framework. And how can I be my best? How can I achieve my best, even though maybe sometimes it's physically impossible to achieve what your neighbor Mary achieved? Focus on what you can achieve and what you're good at. Because I promise we have so many strengths. We just have to just take a seat back and really think about what we're good at. We're good at more than what we know or than what we think.
Yeah. I mean, you can't measure yourself against your neighbors, right? It's always a better outlook to measure yourself against your progress. Like what did you do yesterday or last year or the year before?
Absolutely.
And how does that look compared to today versus your neighbor? But it's a shift. We are prone to go to the negative. So it's a shift.
We are. One thing we have to remind ourselves is that we are running our own race.
Yeah.
We were not designed to run Mary's race. If we ran Mary's race, we probably wouldn't do that well.
Right.
We were designed to do our race well.
Yeah.
And remembering that we have to run our race.
Are there any other patterns you want to hit on?
Absolutely. So the last one I wanted to talk about too was mother blaming. So this is also quite a dysfunctional generational pattern that I know there's been a lot of popular buzz around. This is the pattern where mothers take the hit for what the daughters didn't accomplish. And although, yes, maybe mother did cause those hurts, but at some point we have to take the reins and we have to take responsibility, either for the part that we played or just for our own healing, especially if our mothers are not around and cannot physically be there to say, I'm sorry. And we have to find a way to meet our own needs. Just sad some of the terms that are being passed around are, like mother wound, just narcissistic mother, even just the attachment theories that we're taught in graduate school are around what the mother didn't do and what the mother should do. I'm like this because my mother didn't hold me enough. I'm like this because my mother didn't validate me enough. And although those things maybe were present, we also have to think about, why did mother not validate enough? Did her mother not validate her enough? Did she put her down all the time? Did her grandmother not validate her mother enough? So we have to look, there's much more to that than just focusing on what mother didn't do.
For my own personal relationship, I think some of what sort of set my mind free around some of these challenges was identifying what you just said, getting to a place where you can say, but why? And they did the best they could based on what they knew. And I sort of think, whether it's an excuse or not, I used that to set me free as well from some of my own things that I probably didn't do perfectly well with my children's. But I don't want to call it an excuse. I think it's a knowing. I think it's just being more enlightened, because I think when you can realize where people came from and why it was their program that caused them to act a certain way, and then of course our program or our limitations that caused us to act a certain way, I do think if you can get to that place, it starts to let you heal.
Absolutely. There's a quote that Maya Angelou says, do the best that you can until you know better.
Yeah.
Then when you know better, do better.
Yeah.
And I really believe my mother had a very, very difficult past and with a lot of hurts. And so her toolbox coming into motherhood was not very full, was not very diverse. And having a daughter, she didn't set out to say, I'm going to hurt my daughter and, I'm going to not validate her and I'm going to show her how not to show her feelings and, engage in emotional silencing. I really don't think mothers going into motherhood thinking, I'm going to hurt my child. I really don't. I think we do the best. Like you said, we do the best that we can with what we have. Some of us have more tools than others. And when we don't have those tools, we learn how to acquire those tools so that we can do better.
Wow, what a great first half of my discussion with Erica. I hope you guys are learning as much as I am and identifying the patterns of these relationships that are probably in most of our lives and we didn't have names for, but now we can understand a little better and start to figure out how to proceed with getting better tools to help navigate through some of them or to repair them. So if you're interested in learning a little more about those tools and techniques and tips for repairing these mother-daughter relationship patterns or learning more about identifying them in your life, please tune in next week and listen to the second half of my conversation with Erica. See you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.